Hello guys, welcome back to the third part of the Fullstack app. We're gonna extend our Prisma schema, we're gonna do some API calls, and we're gonna code some backend for the Next.Js. I'm going to start with Prisma. Let's go to the schema.prisma file, and we're gonna do some models and some relationships. I'm gonna show you in a diagram how I'm gonna do it. I'm not saying this is the optimal way, but it gets the job done. So we're going to have a category model for our products, we're gonna have a date model, and we're gonna save the stock number and the date for the products, and we're gonna have the product model so we can save the products. Now in the category model we're going to have an ID, a name, the user relationship, in the date model we're going to have an ID, the date time, the stock number, the price, and the product and relationship. In the product model we're going to have an ID, a name, a description, a category relationship, and a user relationship. And we're going to put all the models in the user so we can access them easily. Now that we're done, we're going to type npx prisma migrate so we can apply the migrations. Now let's start by creating the basic user interface for the categories.tsx file. I'm going to import some components from the Mantine core. The components are title, group, theme icon, button, box, table, select, skeleton, model, text input, text, loading overlay, and I'm going to import some functions from the Mantine form so we can validate the form. And finally I'm going to import some icons so we can make the user interface more appealing. I'm gonna start by creating the title of the page. We're going to make a group that contains the title and the icon. Now I'm going to make a select component so we can search for a particular category. The select component is clearable, searchable. We're going to put no categories found in the nothing found property. We're going to put the icon and some transition. In the SX property, we're going to put max width 600 pixels and some margin of 1.5 rem. Now let's comment the select component so we can define the state of it. I'm going to create a category in the Prisma Studio so we can test the queries later. Let's go to our config folder and we'll create an Axios instance. In our Axios instance, we're going to define the base URL and we're going to set with credentials property to true so we can send the cookies to the API. Next, create a query folder and create a category queries.ts file. Let's bring in the useQuery and the useMutation hook and of course the Axios instance. Before we define the queries, I'm going to define the types. I will create a file in the types folder getCategories.ts. I'm going to import the category in the date and the product type from the Prisma client. I will define the type of the category product. The category product is the type of the product plus the date. Of course, let's export the interface of getCategory. We are going to need the ID of the category, the name of the category, and the products of the category. Now let's import the type getCategory in the category queries file and let's define the getCategories Axios call. We're going to hit the /categories path so we can get our data. Now let's create our custom hook so we can use our useQuery function. I'm going to define a key, categories, and we're going to call the getCategories function. Let's export the use getCategories. Now let's define our API. I'm going to import the next API request and the next API response. Of course, we need Prisma too, and the get server session so we can access the ID of the user. Let's import our auth options from the NextAuth file, and now we're going to define our API. Let's grab our session. We're going to pass the request, the response, and the auth options. If there is no session, the user is unauthorized, else we are going to return the categories. Now I'm not going to explain how Prisma works, I'm going to assume you know how to use the package. In the select property, I'm returning some fields of the products and the date. Of course, I forgot to define our price and our Prisma schema. I'm going to put it now, and I'm gonna run npx migrate dev so we can apply the changes. I will return only one date object because we're interested in the latest date object. It contains the latest stock and some additional information. Now let's return our categories. Now in the categories.tsx file, let's import the use getCategories hook. Let's destructure our hook so we can grab the data, and I'm gonna name the data categories and there is loading state, so we are able to know if the browser is waiting for the API answer. You see, I forgot to provide our query client, so in the _app.tsx file I'm going to define the query client and I'm gonna provide it to the query client provider. We'll wrap the whole component with our query client provider so we can access the React query data. And of course we need the React query development tools too. Now in our browser we can see the categories key. The categories key is the useGetCategories hook we just used. I made a mistake and I created the categories.tsx file in the auth folder. We need it in the API folder. Now we need to fix the imports and we're ready. I will use a try catch block too, so we can catch the error. I will restart the server because I applied a new migration. Now if we refresh our browser we can see the category we fetched. Now let's define our select data. The select data is the autocomplete values of the select component. And we need to define the select value state too, so we are able to know what the user typed in the select component. Now let's define a use effect so we can set the select data after the query is finished. We only need the names of the categories. I'm going to need a .map function and I'm going to set the select data. The select data is equal to the previous select data plus the new name of the new category. Finally, we need to create a state so we can save the filtered categories. Only for testing, we're going to set the filtered values to all the categories. Finally, we're able to see the autocomplete in the select component. Let's add the onChange property to the select component. The onChange property is the setSelectValue. Our next step is to create a component if there are no categories in the user account. If the length of the category is 0 and the category's loading is done, we are going to render the component. The component is very basic. I'm going to put a text, and an icon too in a group component. Finally, we're going to render the data in the accordion component. But before that, I will create a skeleton component so we can let the user know if the category query is still in loading state. Of course, if you go to the Mantine website, you can see both the accordion and the skeleton component. The skeleton component is these gray lines. I will put the animate property too, and we need minimum height of 80 pixels. Now let's create the accordion state. In the skeleton component, we are going to define the accordion component. I'm gonna pass the value and the onChange property. We need a transition duration, and finally I'm going to map the filtered categories. I will return an accordion item for each category. The value of is the category name, and I'm gonna use the overflow X auto in the SX property. The accordion item will contain an accordion control component. In the accordion control component, I will pass the category name. Now for the first time we are able to see our category rendered, and of course we can use the select component too. Now in order to test the select component, I will create a new category. Now in order to see the filtered data by the search value, we need to create a use effect. So I'm gonna set the filter values if the category's name matches the input. Finally, we can see the select component is working properly. In the Mantine documents, we can see here the structure of the accordion. The accordion item needs a control component and a panel component. So I will create an accordion panel component, and we are going to define a new table in the panel. In the table we will show information about the category. I'm going to pass a vertical spacing and a horizontal spacing. We need a t-head component, and here I'm gonna paste the name, the price, the ID, the last updated, and the stock value. Now in the browser we can see the results. In the t-body component, I'm gonna map the categories products. We need the product name, the price, the ID of the product, the last updated property, and the stock. The stock of the product will be available only if we defined it. If we didn't, we are going to display the user that the stock is 0. Now I will show you our results in the browser. Under the table component, I'm gonna create 2 buttons. The first button will be about the changing of the details, and the second button will be about deleting the category. Finally, under the skeleton component, we will create a button so the user will be able to create a new category. Now for the last part of this tutorial, we're going to create some models. We will validate the form, and I'm going to define a new API path. I will create the model in order to create a new category. Let's start by the types. Create a new file and name it postcategory.ts. Let's import Z from Zod and create our schema. I will name our schema postCategory schema. It will contain a Zod object and in there we are going to put the name. The name must be minimum 2 characters long. Let's infer the types of the schema and export both the type and the schema. Now we are ready to use the types in our queries. But before that, let's create the category path in the API. Let's import Prisma, auth options, the types for the request and the response, and the get server session from the NextAuth. And of course, we need the post category schema so we can validate the user input server side. If the user is not authorized, of course, we're going to send a message. If the user is authorized and the request method is post, we're going to validate the name property in the request body. We're going to use the save parse function, and if the response of the save parse function is not successful, we are going to send the errors to the user. If the response is successful, we are going to create the category. And finally, we are able to create our mutation. Let's define our Axios function. The post category type is automatically imported. And now let's create our custom hook for the mutation. And of course, export it. Now let's import the use post category in the categories.tsx file, and we're gonna create the modal state. The modal state will define if the modal is closed or opened. we want the modal to be centered, and we're gonna pass the create modal to the opened property. And on close, we're gonna pass the set create modal. Our title will be create category, and if the user clicks the create category button, we're gonna set the create modal to true. As you can see, the modal works perfectly. Now let's create our form. In the form we want a text input. I'm gonna paste the properties. And I'm gonna create two buttons in a group component. The first button will be the submit button, and the second button will be the exit button. If you click the exit button, the modal will close. Now we will use the use form hook so we can validate the text input. Let's define our form. Of course, we're gonna use the ZOD resolver for validation, and the initial value will be an empty string. Now let's use the use post category. We need the mutation. I'm gonna name it post category, and the is loading property. I'm gonna name it post category loading. Now on submit, we'll just console log the values for now. And I'm gonna create a loading overlay. I'm gonna pass a transition duration and the visible property. The visible property will be the post category loading. Now I'm gonna show you the loading overlay. If the post category loading is true, a spinner will appear. Now in the next input we need to get the input props, and finally everything is working perfectly. Now on submit we'll post the categories, we'll pass the values, and we will create a function that will run only if the post category is successful. So on success we'll close the model and we will refetch the categories. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, you can subscribe to my channel for more tutorials like this. The full source code will be on the description below. If you decide to download the source code, you will help my channel very much.